The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
Breaking news, CBS News has learned that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is set to plead guilty to a single count of violating the Espionage Act. CBS's Charlie D'Agata reports the charges were tied to the leak of hundreds of thousands of classified documents in 2010.
In the twists and turns of the Julian Assange saga, this may be the most extraordinary yet. According to court records unsealed Monday, Assange is expected to plead guilty, but will serve no time in a U.S. jail or anywhere else. Instead, the 62 months he has spent in a British prison will essentially count as time served for his crime. And he's making that guilty plea in Saipan in the northern Mariana Islands, a U.S. Commonwealth in the Western Pacific, not far from Assange's native homeland of Australia. The WikiLeaks founder has been locked up in a British prison since April 2019 as the U.S. government has sought his extradition to America. In 2010, WikiLeaks published a series of leaks provided by U.S. Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning, including diplomatic cables and footage from a U.S. military helicopter allegedly showing the killing of Iraqi civilians in Baghdad.
Well, there you have it, folks. Julian Assange, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, he's free at last. Now, the question is, did the Deep Shallow Dive episode, actually a Deep Shallow Dive exclusive episode that was done on Julian Assange, was that responsible for his release? I mean, I don't know. Was it? I mean, all I know is that prior to that episode, he was in jail. That episode... I'm just kidding. Anyway, that's big news. That is big news. And I want to kind of talk about it in 1 second, but let's hear the rest of this CBS story.
In a 2015 interview, he spoke about the strain his forced exile has had on his family.
In some ways, you must, if you believe in something and you want to see it occur, you have to pay a price.
His wife, Stella, has made repeated pleas for his release, citing his declining health.
This case is shameful, and it is taking an enormous toll on Julian.
And now he is about to taste freedom from exile and prison for the first time in years, no longer on the run from U.S. authorities.
All right, so, I mean, that is huge news. Now, the timing of it is a little suspect, and that's because of this.
The most anticipated moment of this election, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The president and the former president, one stage, moderated by Jake Tapper and Dana Bash. The CNN presidential debate, Thursday night at 9, live on CNN and streaming on Max.
So presidential debate on Thursday. I think they're related. I really do. So this will be interesting to see if President Biden brings up the Julian Assange thing during the debate. And if he does, he's going to basically say to Trump, hey, you didn't release him, which, by the way, is totally true. It's totally true. That honestly is one of, you guys know I've already said this about a million times. I'm not all in on anything related to Trump, nor Biden for that matter. But one of the strikes against Trump, which again is one of the reasons why I'm not all in on it, is because it never made sense for him not to have pardoned Assange. Assange basically stood for exactly what Trump supposedly stands for. He stood for anti-establishment, breaking out of, well, this is Assange, that is, the military-industrial complex, calling all that to task, and basically making the globalist class accountable for what they've done. And again, that's kind of what Trump prides himself on to an extent. And so it would have been very on brand for him to have pardoned Assange, but he didn't. So I guess in some ways, one could argue that is on brand, that he didn't. anyway, that's definitely one of the things that, kind of brought up a red flag for me when it came to Trump. I never understood that. I think I played when he was on Candace Owens. I don't feel like finding the segment, but there was a segment where he was on Candace Owens and she asked him, and you could tell even she was surprised, although she didn't press him very much. And none of those Trumpers really do. It's like he has a whole gang of social media influencers that all just kind of kiss his ass and basically worship him, which again, I have no problem with them supporting him, but they do not call a spade on him. I will tell you that. And if I ever get Donnie on the DSD, he better get ready, man. I'm going to call a spade on him. Homie, don't play that. All right. So presidential debate on Thursday. By the way, I'm bringing this up also. It's going to be a little change in the schedule this week. So chances are we've got this episode today. I will hopefully actually release a Deep Shallow Dive guest interview for tomorrow on Wednesday. And then, you know what? I'll either release it Wednesday or Thursday. I normally release those on Friday, but I want to react to the presidential debate on Friday. So the guest interview for this week will come out either Wednesday or Thursday. And by the way, gosh, can't even believe I forgot to do this. I was going to start off with this, but anyway, thanks for all the nice comments about the guest interview on Friday with Sam Showman, who was the gentleman that lives in the West Bank. He's of Palestinian descent, and I got a lot of good feedback and a lot of nice comments on it, and a lot of questions, actually. So I'm in the process of gathering all those questions and getting some answers to some of them. I had a couple people point out some interesting things, and I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm trying to get some clarity around those interesting things. So more to come on that. But anyway, if you didn't get a chance to listen to it, take a listen to Friday's episode. I think it's definitely interesting. And speaking of these guest interviews, man, they have really revved up. I've actually done a lot of them. I have more right now in editing than I could even imagine. There's probably close to 12 of them that are getting edited. So I may end up actually upping the release schedule. I've been trying to do those every Friday, but there are some that are maybe only 30, 40 minutes. And so maybe I'll start to release those I'll intersperse those into the weekly episodes, because everybody seems to like it. People seem to like when I'm bringing guests on. So I will try to up that a little. All right, let me play you something. I've been meaning to play this for a long time. It's one of the clips that's been sitting on my phone. But man, this dude was a legend, and I never realized how unbelievably intelligent he was until I've started listening to a lot of his clips over the past couple years.
Murderers. Here's an interesting form of murder we came up with. Assassination. You know what's interesting about assassination? Well, not only does it change those popularity polls in a big fucking hurry, but it's also interesting to notice who it is we assassinate. Do you ever notice who it is? Stop to think of who it is we kill. It's always people who've told us to live together in harmony and try to love one another. Jesus, Gandhi, Lincoln, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John Lennon. They all said, try to live together peacefully. Bam! Right in the fucking head. Apparently, we're not ready for that.
Seriously, think about that. That's such a profound statement. All of those people that have been assassinated were all people advocating for peace, advocating not for war, taking money out of the pocket of the MIC. If you don't know what MIC is, that is military industrial complex. And now listen to this. This was another great interview on Tucker Carlson. I know. I've brought Tucker in the mix now. Dude does some great interviews. What can I say? He really does. This is a guy, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. I've actually played this guy several times. He was Professor Sachs, that is, he was the main guy that basically said, the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which they absolutely did. And he's been right on so many things. And this guy is such an intellect. He's really, really good. But give this a listen. It goes along the lines of what we just heard.
A big part of the CIA's job is taking down leaders of foreign countries. How long before it does that here in the United States?
Yeah, probably 61 years ago was their first run at this with President Kennedy. It was clearly someone's operation, not Lee Harvey Oswald's.
That's pretty obvious.
All we know, and all of the evidence points in that direction. The most recent evidence that magic bullet, which was one of the justifications of the absurd account of a lone gunman, was also debunked. Most likely it was a government coup.
If you seriously still think Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone on JFK, oh man, we're going to have a talk. We're going to have a serious talk. That single bullet theory, which again, for those of you new to the Deep Shallow Dive, we do have a full episode on JFK. I've got a full episode on the Nord Stream pipeline. I've got a full episode on what else? Oh, on Julian Assange. So there's all kinds of full episodes on those guys. But what he's talking about there is, I think a few months ago, something else came out and they just completely debunked that single bullet theory that one bullet could have done all that harm. So anyway, the question is, who did kill JFK? Who really did? I mean, obviously that clip with Jeffrey Sachs and Tucker Carlson leads people to think, or they're leading people to think that it was the CIA. But then there's also a whole different thought process and a lot of stuff that says it was the Israeli Mossad. And that was because in, 1963, I think it was when he died. Yeah, November 12th, 1963. But during that time, there was a lot of back and forth between Kennedy and then the guy that was the leader, actually the founder of Israel, David Ben-Gurion. All right, I'll find some stuff on that because actually that's a pretty interesting story too. There's definitely some things related to the Israeli lobby and things like that. And again, by the way, this isn't Ray D's thought process. This is all like tons of information that's out there. So I'll try and pull a little bit of that because again, that's interesting as well. I've always been of the mindset that the JFK thing really more than anything had to do with that military industrial complex because he wanted to pull the U.S. out of Vietnam. And Vietnam really was the beginning of this forever wars concept. It really was, which obviously the best example of that started in 2001 with the Twin Towers coming down and the 20-year war in Afghanistan, where, again, just to refresh your memory, we removed the Taliban, spent 20 years there, trillions and trillions of dollars, millions of lives were lost, and in 2021, we gave it right back to the Taliban. It's like, okay, hey, we're done. And then after that, what happened? Oh, 2022, Ukraine and Russia war started, which, by the way, I did record my episode with Professor Demetrius Flautus, whom is an expert in Russian-Ukrainian relations. And actually, you know what? I'll try to release that one. Maybe I'll release that tomorrow or Thursday because it's really interesting. It's really good. And it will shed a lot of light on the backstory of Russia and Ukraine. And just like I've said many times, the situation in Israel and Palestine did not start on October 7th. The situation in Russia and Ukraine did not start in March of 2022 with that invasion. All right, man, we're flowing a little nicely here. So speaking of 9/11, here's some more nuggies. Here's some more nuggies about 9/11.
Collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fires.
I, along with 1,400 other architects and engineers,
have found the government's conclusion to be physically impossible.
Impossible.
We need the truth about what happened that day.
Approximately 5:20 p.m. on September 11th, 2001, World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed in 6.5 seconds from normal office fires, according to the government's final report.
All right, so this clip again has to do with Building 7. And you know, when I talk about the 9/11 stuff, honestly, I'd rather just focus on Building 7 because that's the weirdest one. You know, the towers, again, I think those could not have fallen from the plane situation either, whatever. But the Building 7, this one is you really can't. You can poke a hole in this. How about that? You can poke a hole in it because it's a completely unrelated building that didn't get struck by anything, and it fell at free fall pace, and it looked like a controlled demolition.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
Later, the government finally admitted that Building 7 collapsed at the rate of free fall, after trying to deny it. So what's wrong with a building in free fall? What is free fall?
It's just like taking your car keys out and just dropping them. That's how fast the building came down, for over 100 feet.
This is high school physics. A building cannot do free fall with 40,000 tons of structural steel in its structural system without it being blown up.
The only way that a building can accelerate as it collapses is by having pre-engineered, precisely timed, and precisely placed explosives. In other words, controlled demolition.
I mean, seriously, you just cannot even... You cannot argue that one. That one makes zero sense. But you know what? Here's actually the bigger takeaway from that. So regardless of what you believe, and again, you're welcome to believe whatever you want, the fact that, I don't even know how I want to say this, but the fact that it is even that controversial, or what happened was never questioned by the general public, really, because even to this day, I mean, I have this discussion with a lot of people. Like when I get into a conversation with somebody and they really want to like talk about all this kind of stuff, I start off with three things. I say, okay, let's start off with, who do you think killed JFK? That's my first question. From there, and I haven't talked about this much, but I will, I get into the moon landing. I really do. I get into the moon landing because I want to get their perspective on the moon landing. And then number three is, I'm like, okay, 9/11, you know, I mean, do you think there's a chance there's more to that story or not? And again, I'm not even asking you to make a judgment one way or the other. And even with like the moon landing, I'm just saying, do you think it could maybe not have happened? I just want to see if they're open to talking about the other side of things. And if they're totally, like if they're no on all three of those, I just say, hey, you need another beer? And then we just move on because those discussions are not even worth having. But if the mind is open and they're willing to have a little discussion, then we have nice discussions. And when it comes to the 9/11 stuff, I mean, the thing I find the most interesting is this Building 7, also the Pentagon, the building that crashed into the Pentagon and then they said completely eviscerated, like it just disintegrated. Like whenever has a plane crash ever done that? Never. That's the first plane crash in history that's disintegrated into like vapor. How does that happen? And then even the United, I think it was Flight 93 that fell in that field. There were no plane parts there either. That one didn't make sense either. Anyway. All right. So that's that stuff. To conclude on today's, again, Julian Assange, he's a free man. I thought the timing was interesting with the debate coming up. Let's see if Biden mentions it during the debate or not. Secondly, there is a debate on Thursday for those of you that didn't know. I am very curious to see what the ratings are going to be on this, because if you ever would watch a debate, and I've been watching all of them over the past really 4 years, I think this is the one to watch. And by the way, I believe it is on CNN and it is on Max, which is the old HBO Max. So I think it's on CNN and Max. That's a little strange that they wouldn't cut a deal and just put this thing everywhere, because it should be everywhere. It should be on all the networks. It literally should be on every channel on television. They should all air it because it's important. It's important. It's very important for us to watch this. I'm obviously going to watch it. I'll report back on Friday. And then, like I said, we'll hopefully release a guest interview either tomorrow or Thursday. Anyway, I'm going to end you with something, with some fun and some funniness. This is a comedian I follow on Instagram. He's hilarious. And no offense to my realtor friends, none at all. I love you guys dearly. But here's why you can't bring realtors on podcasts. All right, call a spade a spade. Enjoy.
Simple question. Why are you living if you don't own at least 10 rental properties? Ask yourself. Each one of my 13 children own at least 5. It's mandatory. Well, you're not my blood. I haven't talked to my mom in 10 years. She got to buy a rental property. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. You know what the first step is to generational wealth? Yeah. It's already being wealthy. It's not that hard. It's all about the mindset. I buy at least 1 rental property a day. I bought 3 on my way up here. What's your excuse? I just bought 50 more. You buy my course for $20, we turn that 20 into 40, we turn that 40 into 80. Come on, we turn that 80 to 160. And so on, and so on, and so on. And after you done bought 80 courses, you might be able to afford a rental property. That's genius. If it's not about rental properties, we can't even talk. Hello? Is this about rental properties? Oh. I hang up the phone. I remember coaching Little League. I was the Little League coach. One of the other players stole third base. I sued his parents. I don't want no thieves around me. And I used that money to buy a rental property.
The ending was terrific.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.